I'd like to go back, though, to the world before Noah, the one that was created in the beginning, and some of the characteristics. The waters above. It says, let there be a firmament, and I'm going to concentrate on what this world was like, and the waters above are prominent in this because they don't exist today. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. That's in Genesis 1:6. The waters above, it says, thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. This is in Genesis 1:7. This takes place in the second day. The atmosphere, and I take the firmament as being the atmosphere, divides the waters below from the waters above. This would form a water canopy. The waters above was probably of water vapor rather than a solid like ice or a liquid form. And it would surround the earth above the present atmosphere. The waters above supplied some of the flood waters because it says the windows of the heavens were open in Genesis 7:11 as the water canopy collapsed as rain during the time of the flood. The effects of the waters above in the atmosphere before the flood had several effects. One, you'd have a moderate reflection of solar radiation and a moderate greenhouse effect of the water canopy, providing a mild, semi-tropical climate for abundant plant and animal life, and this would be over the whole earth, including the poles, north and south poles. There were not polar regions in this type of an atmosphere. There'd be a uniform temperature over the whole earth, such as you have on Venus. You would have the same temperature at the poles as you have at the equator. Fossils of all sedimentary layers, except the recent ones like the Pleistocene, show uniform global temperatures. There would be no rain from weather fronts colliding because there's no temperature differences and no temperature zones. Also, without temperature differences, there would probably be no strong winds but very gentle breezes in the earth. Other effects from the waters above. The water canopy will protect from very strong solar radiation, and you'll have less DNA damage and longer life for plants and animals as a consequence. The atmospheric pressure, because of the canopy above, the water weight in vapor form, would increase and would be higher than today, and it would be created by the additional weight of the canopy waters. An example is Venus's heavy canopy, and theirs is more than 90 times higher than the Earth's. And they only have about twice the radiation that we have. So we could probably contain an atmosphere of water pressure of 50 times of our present atmosphere. I would suspect that it's less than that, and I'll give you a reason here shortly. Giants and in plants and animals could exist in this hyperbaric pressure. That means a high pressure atmosphere, which would allow for higher body metabolism for larger animals and denser air for flight of the large animals too. Let me give you an example. When we increase the atmospheric pressure at the surface of sea level, for instance, an athlete can run a lot better because he has more oxygen. If you take him up to the top of a high mountain like Pikes Peak, his performance drops tremendously down with the same athlete because he's lost atmospheric pressure. The oxygen goes down. But if you have a supercharged one, then you have a lot more oxygen to carry on metabolism. You can run stronger. You can perform a lot better. A bird, for instance, could generate a lot more energy to fly. Also, the heavier air would allow the birds to fly too. They would have air to get aerodynamic lift. Particularly in this atmosphere, animals like reptiles and plants like trees would continue to grow. There's no limit to the size they get. The older they are, the bigger they get. And so if you have longevity from DNA, protection from solar radiation, you have better oxygen, hyperbaric pressures, then you'll also extend life. In fact, hyperbaric pressures are used in special clinics to heal people. Your healing takes place a lot better. You'll live a lot longer in these type of heavier atmospheres. So this is the world before. Let's look at the seas that exist, because we know that the world was divided into sea and land. And there was probably like a Pangea, one big continent and the rest was seas. But the seas, however, before the flood were probably shallow, since subsurface features of our present oceans indicate that they were exposed to the atmosphere with much lower ocean levels at one time. Seas before the flood probably covered a much smaller proportion of the Earth's surface. Presently, 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with ocean, and over half of it, over 50% of the oceans, are more than a mile deep. And I'm just making this as an assumption, but it appears that the oceans, because we know that they were a lot lower at one time, covered a much smaller portion of the earth. Land, on the other hand, would have several other features. Since the Lord in the future, we know, like Isaiah 54:9, will bring down the mountains in the future because of their haughtiness, the original created earth probably had no mountains or hills. The number of animal and plant life species in the Genesis creation were much more numerous than today. As fossil records indicate, there are probably 100 times more species than exist today. The land before the flood was watered, it appears, by subterranean water sources without rain, because it says very clearly a mist came up from the ground to water the plants because there was no rain in those days. Also, all the plants and animals from the Genesis we know were created according to their kind. Why this is very important is, one, this inability of flora and fauna species of mixing with other species would produce an infinite and probably a very deadly variety of species combinations. For instance, an extreme case was an elephant's snout on a mosquito or something of that extreme. Whereas if they could crossbreed, this would produce these very unusual characteristics, but those acquisition of those characteristics would cause every species to die, because they have very special characteristics, each species to live in a certain environment. If it loses any of those, it will die off. These genetic walls of separation, according to their kind, between species makes the evolution of new species impossible, contrary to modern evolutionary thinking, especially where a male and female of each species is necessary to propagate a species. They'd have to occur at the same time on the earth, the male and the female. They have to be approximately the same age, and they happen to have to breed to produce the new species, because they can't breed back to their progenitor if they came from that. Almost all of the species on that we have on the earth exist without change today. And that's why you have some of evolutionary's most ancient species are alive today and unchanged, they say, as living fossils. But all the species are set up so that there's, in the geological records, you have no intermediate forms between species. You should have a continuum if evolution was true. But God didn't create them that way. He made them with sharp barriers so that they can't produce either evolution nor this infinite variety of crossbreeding that would destroy almost every species if they did that. We do know from fossil records that giants in plants and animals existed, just like this would be the case with this hyperbaric pressure. And you find animals, for instance, dinosaurs that are 80, and animals that are 80 to 100 tons. Well, the largest one we can sustain now is about a 6-ton elephant. It gets much bigger, it'll run out of oxygen. Like a whale gets beached on there, it breathes air. It's not out of its element, but it's out of its water, but it'll die because its lungs and everything are not built to the capacity to live in present day atmospheric pressures. We also know that 99% of all species, again from the fossil records, have become extinct. And there's only 1% of the original creation remains today. Fossil records in the sedimentary rocks indicate that plants and animals in the pre-Noahic, this is before Noah, flood creation, were spread with a uniform temperature over the earth. For instance, at the equator, you find the same fossils that you find in Antarctica and Arctic. They had the same temperature and living conditions. We have huge coal beds of extinct, now semi-tropical and tropical plants are found worldwide. They're all the same, including Antarctica and Arctic regions. Antarctica has probably the largest coal beds today formed out of tropical plants, lycopods. And they're extinct, but what are they doing growing down there where you can't even get trees to grow or grass or anything else? It's because the world was uniform at that time. Many extinct animals, such as the mammoth, mastodons, saber-tooth tigers, extinct bison, certain wolves, hippos, camels, which are not from the Arctic region, are found frozen up there. Probably killed during the flood, drowned because they're immersed in mud, and frozen and kept to this day, preserved. Let's look at the celestial bodies before the flood. The sun, moon, and stars are immediately visible through the waters above and the atmosphere after their creation. This region where this canopy would be above the atmosphere will support a reasonably large amount of water. As we've said, the radiation from the sun is sufficient to keep it in vapor form there. Since the vapor canopy would absorb solar radiation effectively, the warmer temperatures of the canopy would hold a large amount of water. They would give the earth, as we've said, a uniform temperature, and they protect life from destructive radiation. Secondly, the water canopy above the earth cannot be too dense, however. Even though the earth could support it, it's got enough radiation to pump a lot of vapor into the upper atmosphere. It can't be too dense because the light from the celestial bodies, from the stars and everything, would be absorbed or reflected by the water canopy and would not allow light to reach the earth's surface. I'll give you an example. Sunlight is totally absorbed by 3,000 feet of clear ocean water, leaving at 3,000 feet down total darkness. Water is a very good absorbent, even though it's transparent, of light radiation. Lastly, the speed of light, according to Einstein's special relativity, would be 186,000 miles per second or 300,000 kilometers per second. If that was true, then the nearest star would not be seen before 4 years. So Adam and Eve would not have seen any stars in the sky for 4 years. Even more, none of the present galaxies that we see out there would be visible with our telescopes after 6,000 years.